Hey guys, how's it going? It's Krista here, and today I'm making two cards. And for both those cards, I'll be using Trinity Stamps Clover Background Foil Plate, and I'll be hot foiling that with Spellbinders Glimmer Hot Foil in Gold. I'll start off today by creating my background, and I have my Spellbinders Glimmer Hot Foil machine hot and ready to go. And I chose to let my machine sit longer than the timer just because I have a background plate and I'm also foiling onto watercolor paper. This is Canson watercolor paper, and there's one side that is smoother than the other, and I want to make sure to place the smoothest side down. And I didn't get a very clean foil on this card, and that's okay because I'm going to be painting and adding a sentiment, so it won't be noticeable in the final project. And it's because that watercolor paper isn't entirely smooth that it didn't transfer 100%. I started off today by taping down my background to my glass mat and adding some water, some clean water with a number 11 round brush. And I taped that down because I wanted to prevent any warping when I added all the liquid. I want to start with just a wash of color. And I'm using a really thin consistency of paints. These are Holbein paints. And a thin consistency means that there's more water than pigment. And I don't really have a plan when I'm placing down these pigments. I'm just making sure that each of the greens stands alone, but also mixes with the surrounding greens. In creating today's background, I'm creating layers of color, and this is the first layer. And this thin consistency of paint will dry fairly light compared to the other layers that we'll be adding over top of this initial wash. I did decide that up top was a little bit too light, so I did come in with a darker green just to balance my background. If you don't have a glass mat, you can also tape your background to an artist's hardboard. And the benefit of the hardboard is you can set it aside to dry if you have other things to complete for your card. So just to speed up the process, I came in with my heat tool. And for the second layer, I'm coming in with a thicker consistency of paint. This is more of like a medium consistency, so there's less water and more pigment. And I'm depositing that pigment at the center of each of the clovers, and then coming in with a clean and damp brush to pull that pigment out to the outer edge. And I'm pulling that pigment right to the very outer edge of the clover. And when I chose to place each of the green shades, I placed the green shades that I'm coming in with on a different shade than the background wash, just to make them stand out and really pop. And even though I'm pulling that pigment all the way out to the outer edge, I'm still leaving a darker center and then pulling it out lighter towards the edges. I didn't color every clover because I liked how some of the greens mixed in the background, but in the future I'd like to try a background where I color every clover. Now I wanted to bring in yet another layer of color. This is a little bit deeper of a shadow. And to create that shadow, I am taking some Sepia by Holbein and mixing it with my green shade. And it's much easier to mix the sepia, a little bit of sepia, with your shade of green than it is to make your sepia green. And this time I'm depositing that pigment on like green shades. So I call this, it looks like Lucky Clover to me by Distress. I always think of it as my Lucky Clover green in this background. So I'm placing quote unquote like Lucky Clover on Lucky Clover. And I'm still depositing that mix of the green shade with the sepia at the center of each of the clovers, but I'm not pulling this layer all the way out to the outer edge. I'm just pulling it out a little bit, but I want to make sure that the lines are still softened. And I like to work a couple clovers at a time, depositing that pigment into a couple clovers, and then I'll come back with a clean and damp brush and pull that pigment out towards the outer edges. If you're more comfortable working one clover at a time, it's totally up to you. That will work as well. It's whatever you're comfortable with. For the final layer, I'm actually using some white gouache. And my white gouache was clogged, and this is way too much white gouache. But I'll take a little bit of that white gouache, and I have a little bit of water just on my glass mat that you can't really see. So I'm making a thinner consistency of white gouache. It's probably a medium to a thin consistency that I'm applying to the background. And I'm working a few clovers at a time, depositing that white gouache on the outer edges this time, and then blending it out towards the center. But I'm not taking the white gouache all the way towards the center because we'll lose that shadow that we just built up with the sepia. And if you find that you have too much white gouache on one of your leaves, you can come in with a rag or a piece of paper towel and just pick up that gouache and then continue to blend out the remaining white gouache with a clean and damp brush. So at this point, our painting is done, and you can certainly set it aside to dry naturally. I want to speed up the process with my heat tool. And I know that my background is dry when it no longer feels cool to the touch. For the sentiment, I'm using the word lucky from Trinity Stamps Simply Sentimental Lucky Coordinating Die Set. And I want to add some adhesive sheet to the back of my black cardstock. So I'm lining up one side of my black cardstock with my adhesive sheet just so that I can measure the width of the die once. And when it's offset a little bit like this, I'll cut it together so I only have to measure it once. Remove the backing from the adhesive sheet and adhere them together. And once they're adhered together, I can run that lucky word through my die cut machine. And for the shadow die, I'm using the coordinating lucky die from Simply Sentimental Lucky Die Set from Trinity Stamps. And I cut that out of white shimmer cardstock from Recollections. And with the adhesive sheets and a pair of tweezers, this sentiment was so easy to put together. And I chose to put 2 layers of the black cardstock and a final layer of the pastel gold cardstock from Recollections on top. And for the gold cardstock as well, I also added that to an adhesive sheet just so it was easier to add those letters to the rest of my sentiment. For I'm So and To Know You, I'm embossing that onto black cardstock, and after adding the anti-static powder, I inked up my stamps with some Versamark ink, closed that over, and added some Ranger white embossing powder. And once I removed the excess, I melted that with my heat tool and trimmed that down with my paper trimmer. To adhere the sentiments to my card front, I used Tombow liquid adhesive, and I chose to use my glass mat as well as my T-ruler. You really probably only need one. I just really wanted to get the proper alignment that I wanted. And I did cut down the card front that I painted, and it's kind of a weird size. It's 3 5/8 by 4 5/8. Don't worry, there's a die for that from Simon Says Stamp rectangle dies. But if you don't have that particular size on a scoring board, it's 3 1/2, and then you move it over 1/8, and then by 4 1/2 plus 1/8 if you're cutting it down with paper trimmers. And I also use the Tombow liquid adhesive to adhere I'm So and To Know You. And I really wanted to pop up this painted background a little bit, so I added some foam tape. And underneath is a piece of white shimmer cardstock, and I'm really disappointed that you can't see it in this picture, but at the very end when I add the sequins to the other card, you can really see the shimmer of the paper. So after I removed the backing of that foam tape, I pressed that onto my white shimmer cardstock and then added that entire card front to a pre-made 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card using Tombow permanent tape runner. For the second card, I die cut 2 Good Lucks out of 110-pound white cardstock. And this die set is from Simon Says Stamp and CZ Designs. It's the Good Luck die set. It has a shadow die as well. And for the top of my sentiment, I used that same pastel matte. And for the shadow die, I die cut the shadow from the white shimmer cardstock by Recollections and added the sentiment to the shadow with Tombow liquid glue. And because I'm adding sequins to this card, I chose to add my Handmade with Love by Crystalline to my card first. And just as I did before, I added foam tape to the back of this card front. And to finish off this card, I'll add some embellishments. These are from Pink Fresh Studio, and it's their metallic pearls in gold. And to adhere those, I use the Tombow liquid adhesive. And that completes our cards for today. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.